Cute. Hi, welcome to It's Going to Be All Right. I'm Clay.
And I'm Niklas.
And we wanted to start a podcast based off of our cumulative experience as academic writing advisors at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences. We spent a lot of time as colleagues talking about writing and instructing writing and improving writing. But a lot of this always ends up happening just you and I in the office. And this is sort of our way to cover all things academic and scientific writing to get it out to people like you.
I think the most interesting conversations is between you and me. Sometimes.
Yeah, we end up working, but it's mostly working around the art of conversation.
Exactly.
And then taking those ideas off. So, Niklas, why don't we start with you? Just introduce yourself and let everybody know who you are and where you're from and what you're doing.
My name is Niklas and I started to work here at the NMBU for 3-4 months ago, something like that. So I'm pretty new. And I was working a little bit with academic writing in my old job over at Østfold University College, but not like full time, like I do now. So a lot of new things to get into, but I do have my experiences with academic writing. I remember when I was a student at the University of Oslo, and I was, I think I told you this just before we started this podcast, I was actually really bad at writing.
Isn't that everybody's first experience, whether we want to admit it or not?
Really bad when I was first in junior high. It starts before that. It starts in primary school. I was cheating at this. We had these tests, writing tests, and I was cheating because I don't know, it was something about it that just made it really hard for me to understand or to remember how to spell these different words. So that was kind of the starting point of it. And then I got to junior high, and I was pretty bad, and I was writing this, what do you call it, stil, when you have to write a story?
I'm not exactly
No, when
a
you have
style,
to write a story, in your case, you had English, right?
Yeah.
And you had to write a little, like an essay or something.
Yeah, I guess we would just call it an essay or like creative writing,
Exactly.
possibly.
So I would always, I wanted to write about knights and skeletons and ghosts and that kind of stuff, and my teacher didn't like it, and my writing was pretty bad as well. I got to high school. My writing was still pretty bad, but I wasn't really paying attention to it. I was more into skateboarding. Then I got to university.
And that's all riding, not writing, so much easier.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot easier. Actually, it's a lot harder. It's a lot harder to skateboard, at least to do it good, than to write. Got to university, and it was no mercy. I just had to get better. And there was no one that was really helping me out. I remember one of the professors was spell checking me. One of the first, I think it was like a term paper or something. And it was, it was not good. The content was all right, but the writing was really bad.
Yeah.
So at that point, I knew that I just really had to spend a lot of time looking over it, getting help from people. But I was all on my own.
And that's everybody's phobia, I've found, too, is that you just... whether you're a creative writer, a novelist, or, in our case, scientific and academic writers, that you just get something that comes back all marked up with red pen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the crushing realization that in someone else's eyes you can't write.
Exactly.
Or you can't spell, worse,
You can't spell.
the focus on grammar and proofreading and punctuation. Yeah.
Exactly. And then we came to like paragraph structure and sort of having a logical flow in your writing. And that was something that came with time, I think. I just really had... I think I was always using... the thing is that people have thought of me as a really structured student. That's not really the case. I just kind of realized that I have so much work to do to be able to get to create something that I was happy with.
And everything behind the scenes, to hear that as well, too, that so many people say to me, oh, you just seem so organized and so on top of it. And, if you could look inside of my brain and see the absolute chaos that is in there. But I also think that's a huge part of what creative writing or academic writing is just it's filtering and controlling the chaos so that what comes out and what you give to people is something that's clear and well structured and understandable.
I was just below average, I think, and I really had to put in some work. And I mean, thankfully, it's a skill that I think I had to do that in many different things. I have many other interests than academic writing, like skateboarding, climbing, playing guitar, and it's all about how much work you actually put into it. And
so there's hope for everybody.
Definitely,
right from
definitely,
right straight from the horse's mouth, Niklas himself.
It's going to be all right.
And this is good stuff to hear from the Norwegian University of Life Sciences Writing Center Coordinator. So that's your current position.
Exactly. Oh, I forgot to tell the listeners that, but yes, I'm the coordinator of the Writing Center. And I was not a good writer from the start, not at all. And I'm not going to say that I'm the best now either, but I'm trying.
Continual improvement.
Exactly.
That's everyone. I'm going through that as well. And I heard it a lot because I've worked at the Writing Center here at the university for 6 years. I had your position about 2 years ago before it became a full-time position, and it was just a temporary position. And now I am a professional researcher as a PhD at this university. So reading and writing is essentially my life and has been for close to the last 6 years. And I can honestly say that in all of that time when I came here, even after having studied from Canada, my writing improved. But so much of that experience had been hearing other people say, oh, but it's got to be so easy for you. You're from Canada. You speak English. That's what I really struggle with. That's my biggest problem is I'm thinking in a different language. I'm writing in a different language. And it's like that's got very little to do with really good writing most of the time. It's your ability to, like I had said, control that chaos inside of your head, get everything organized. And like you say, the skill of just practicing and seeing small improvements and making those small improvements. So we're hoping that that's what this podcast can end up being, that we can go through many of the different ideas and topics and theories and practices of academic writing and hopefully help people realize that, yeah, it's some work, but it's really not as difficult as most people think. It's not like you have this innate talent that you're born with that, William Shakespeare wasn't born and a day later was writing sonnets. It took him a long time, probably many rewrites to make the great writing that he did.
And he was probably obsessed by it.
Probably.
Over one sentence, one word. I mean, I think you just have to accept that it takes time, like with anything else. If you want to learn a certain skateboard trick or, learn something on guitar that is difficult for you, it's going to take some time. It's going to take practice. And writing is the exact same thing. The problem is that a lot of people are focused on the content. So let's say they're going to write a term paper and their focus is on the content. And when it comes time to actually write the thing, they don't know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't really been practicing that skill. And it's been kind of overlooked. That's what you've been talking about for the last, couple of months. That this kind of thing it's implicit, but it ends up being invisible in a way. So that's kind of what we're trying to do something about.
That it ends up, like you say, just being a bit overlooked. It's the last thing that you need to do is think about writing, which I always thought was a bit weird, especially in an academic environment where everything we do is writing. We write to publish. We, as students, write essay assignments. We write final exams. We have to write theses to graduate from university and, get our degrees. If you take a PhD position like me or even you're working on co-authoring some stuff at the moment.
Yeah.
Like that's how we communicate as researchers and as scientists is through the medium of writing primarily. Things like podcasting now or YouTube, digital lectures, that is certainly really exploding. And we're really fortunate. We're sitting inside of the studio where all of that magic happens here at NMBU. So we're quite fortunate that we have access to all of that stuff.
Definitely.
But still, the foundation is writing.
It is writing, and it is at the end of the day, it's all about communicating your ideas in the most sort of effective way. So the thing is that this is probably something that we've been talking about before, but you can have really good thoughts, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can write. But you cannot write really smart things without having smart thoughts. It's kind of like it's connected in that way. So to be able to write something that is reflexive, intelligent, that has that is logically that presents whatever you're writing about in a logical sense, that takes some practice. But I think you get better at organizing your thoughts if you practice your writing.
Yeah, the more you do it, right?
Yeah.
I kind of like to think about it in how writing is all around us, but we don't necessarily always acknowledge it because we're consuming writing as people who enjoy any form of entertainment, really. So if you play music, songs are written.
Of course.
We listen to them. It's a different medium, but we say that you write a song, and songs usually go through multiple revisions, and musicians get better by practicing. Or something like telling a joke. Think how many times in your life, I know it's happened to me a lot, where someone's like, oh, I heard this really, really funny joke. Okay, let me tell you. And they can't communicate it effectively. It's not funny. They put the punchline in the wrong spot. They forget the setup because they just heard it. They haven't practiced it. They weren't the one who necessarily wrote the joke. They don't think about how important it is to structure and get the setup right so that people are engaged. So when you deliver the punchline, it's actually funny.
Exactly. And don't have the showmanship.
Yeah. And so the communication form, writing is very much like how we orally communicate. It really helps us to structure a lot of our thoughts, even if we are communicating. In fact, I've got show notes right here to help me through this. I took time to prepare and write some of these ideas down in the hopes that we can kind of stay on point. But also, it is just part of that way of delivering your communication clearly, effectively, purposefully. And definitely I see that a lot of researchers, as you say, are so focused on the content. What is it that I'm researching? What is it that I found? Okay, well, how do you communicate that in any sort of meaningful way? Because you haven't, as we'd say in English, you can't see the forest for the trees. You're so focused on the minute that you forget that there's a broader world out there. And people who would really benefit from the research that you're doing, but you need to think a little bit more broadly. And of course, practice in the ways that you think, practice in the ways that you incorporate writing into your daily life, whether it's taking notes or writing your thoughts down at the end of the day in a journal, things that very often never come to light. I'm sitting here also with a notebook. I've got about 12 of these, just your regular coil paper notebooks. I'm constantly writing just tidbits of information here and
lists,
there.
All different kinds of things. Yeah.
More than anything, it's not to help the writing I produce. It's to help my thought process.
Oh, yeah, it's organizing my thoughts. And sometimes I make, I wouldn't call it drawings, but sort of models or something, just to sort of see how ideas fit together. But just to get back to music, I know you also play guitar, and I've experienced this multiple times. I mean, you probably have too. Let's say that you made this riff and you like it.
A nice tasty riff.
It's a nice tasty riff. It's juicy, and you kind of want to make a song out of that riff. And then you have another riff, which is also pretty cool, and you try to put them together and it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And then you try to make some kind of a bridge, some way to sort of stitch them together. That doesn't work. And then you bring the riff. Let's say you want to play with some friends, you want to jam. And you start playing the riff, and suddenly you just go into some super simple, easy, and that works. That's how the song ended up. Like the juicy riff plus, let's say, super easy 3-chord, straight to the point punk rock riff. And that's how writing can be. It's not always beneficial. Or let's say you have this, sentence that you really like, and then I want the paragraph to end like this, but it doesn't work. It doesn't have the right flow. maybe you have to split it up into different paragraphs, or maybe you just have to rewrite the sentence and make it straight to the point. And you have to take out some of the nuance, and you could save that for later.
And I think you make a really good correlation there between writing music and other forms of writing, because you said it yourself. You have a riff and you have another riff, and you try to piece them together and use a bridge. And we use bridges in academic writing all the time. Those are how we sort of connect between ideas, and that's something we could talk about in another episode as we get into maybe more technical aspects of academic writing and bridging your thoughts together in effective ways. But also, like you said, you go and you take the riff and you jam with some friends. You go to the rehearsal space, you crank everything up to 10 and you get real loud. And suddenly, the writing it's not this laborious endeavor anymore. It becomes something that's fun. And maybe this is also something that people don't necessarily think about, is because a large part of writing, like the real intention of writing, I guess, is communication. If you're not trying to talk about these ideas with other people and clarify them and have other people give you a bit of input to see, well, do these ideas even make any sense at all? Am I missing something that could be in the middle to act as a bridge? Or is there a different perspective that someone else has that I couldn't have possibly come up with myself because I don't think about these things the way that someone else could? All of that sort of stuff can be really helpful to, like you say, and then you find it. Whether it's a 3-chord, simple, straightforward punk rock riff.
Or it's something complicated.
Or something much more complicated. But the light goes off. You get that eureka moment.
That's the equivalent of jamming out, like talking to people, trying to organize your ideas. And I think just trying to explain, you could try multiple different approaches to this, but let's say that you have some kind of, let's say you're writing about, it could be anything, but it could be how pupils interact in the classroom with, using computers. It could be anything. But let's say you want to discuss this idea with, you want to discuss the idea with your peers, with other students, but you also want to discuss it with your grandmother, your friend who's a plumber, someone who doesn't know anything about what you're doing, doesn't have the same vocabulary as you. And that will be kind of, then you get to test your idea. You can see how easy can I explain this idea without using too many fancy words and not losing any of the content. You don't want to simplify anything. You want it to have the same complexity. You just need to choose your words carefully.
And that's also something that I hear quite often as people come into the writing center. Really great ideas. Okay, well, can you explain it to me? Well, that's the hard part. Well, it shouldn't be that hard if you really understand it. There's that saying that, if you can't explain something simply, you probably don't completely understand it yourself. And that is a big part of it, is just forming that understanding, not just for yourself, but to inform other people's understanding. Because what is the point then of writing an academic text, whether it is an essay or something that you're hoping to get published, if nobody is actually going to really understand what you're trying to explain? It's like sort of exposure to other people and other ideas, especially people who, as you say, don't share the same vocabulary, who force you to think differently. And for me, that is, as you said a little bit earlier, for months when you came into the job, you got to see me go and give some lectures and workshops.
Yes.
And I spent most of my time talking about the importance of the pre-writing process. Everything that goes into, writing that isn't writing. Thinking critically about what it is that you're writing about. What is the problem that you're trying to solve? What is already known about it? Thinking about how you can justify why it's a problem, to justify the type of research that you're doing. So much more of writing is the thinking, the organizing, the literature researching. But very often I think that we kind of take writing for granted at the university level. And definitely my experience, and because you've started working with some professors here, what is that we always hear them saying? Students can't write.
Yeah.
Which Which is
usually what they
bogus,
say.
right? Because if you make it to university, you're definitely not illiterate. You're definitely a literate person. You know how to write.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But what are these like implicit norms and conventions of writing that these students haven't been exposed to yet, and that are supposed to end up being taught or being developed by the student to culminate in the final thesis? And that's where the problem happens, this sort of disconnect between, well, students should just know how to write when they get here already, and it's not our responsibility to teach them how to do it. And the students, who very often are coming from a culture of, well, just tell me what I need to know to pass the test.
Yeah.
There's a huge, huge gap there, which...
Massive difference.
Yeah.
I think that when professors say the students don't know how to write, they're actually talking about, to a certain point, they're talking about the content, but they're talking about how the content is presented. So it's not about, spelling and then punctuation and stuff. It's more about how the ideas are constructed or presented. And that is something that the professors should teach them that, I think. And they could implement that into the different courses. We've been talking a little bit about this before, and I think a lot of it has to do with talking about or trying actively to teach critical thinking. I think that would be the easiest way to sort of get that idea out to the students. Okay, I actually need to connect my ideas like this. Things needs to be connected. And I mean, people are different, but I remember, and this is kind of back to the pre-writing stage, I would get really obsessed by these different ideas. So I would sit at home, I would think at night, I would go out, go for long walks, and just kind of like think about these different ideas and see how to connect them, what to take out, what I could use instead. But not everybody's like that. But then I think you could kind of implement some of the same. You could put that into a course, and I think calling it, let's say, critical thinking, and you could do different like writing exercises. You could have different things where the students could discuss with each other and try to sort of get to the essence of their ideas and actually try to write that and see how that works. Mm-hmm. We've done similar things before.
Yeah. We've definitely seen success with the individual students, the groups of students who come into the Writing Center or participate in workshops with us, where we do a lot of things like this. And I think you bring up two things I want to talk about. One, that everybody is different in how they approach it, because everybody is different in how they learn. And I have been a really big advocate of the idea of multiple intelligences. Yeah. That when I was sitting full time, 3 to 5 days a week in the Writing Center a few years ago, that was one of my favorite things to do with students, is come in and try to give them not just a writing plan, but kind of a thinking plan. So how do you learn best? And if you've never heard of this before, what's really great is you can just go online, search multiple intelligences test, and you will get very simple tests, some of them ranging from about 20 questions up to, I've seen like 100 or 150 questions. And they're sort of like, it's almost like a personality quiz.
It's kind of like a personality quiz.
So do you like animals? Gardner.
Gardner, yeah.
And so the idea has been really developed. I remember being introduced to this when I was studying education and pedagogy close to a decade ago at this point.
In Canada.
Back in Canada at, it's now Mount Royal University. It was Mount Royal College at the time. And it really stuck with me because I think that a lot of people and a lot of educational systems, especially in Europe and North America, have been so focused on this idea of IQ is what matters, the intelligence quotient, except the problem with that is that if you're not inclined for like the logical mathematical thinking, and I'm doing finger air quotes here with this as well, and if you're not inclined towards mathematics, you're not going to do very well at an IQ test.
Probably not.
Which is where this other idea developed, that you have different sort of mental nodes, I believe is what they're being called now, that sort of overlap. That you're not necessarily a bad learner because you do poorly at mathematics and logic. we have a lot of these other sorts of knowledges of interpersonal knowledge and intrapersonal knowledge and musical knowledge, visual knowledge, bodily kinesthetic knowledge, which probably explains why when people are going through their teenage years, here in Norway, it's really interesting to see. It wasn't an opportunity where I was growing up as a kid, that you get a lot of opportunities to go to a sports high school or a forestry high school. Yep. And certainly this happens in Canada in the bigger cities where there are more schools and more people. But people are already kind of going off to take educations based off of things that really kind of make sense to them, probably because it's how they learn.
People are different, you know? And I mean, just this talking about IQ. I mean, let's say that you have high IQ and you can do all these different like logical, mathematical things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can actually use it for anything beneficial. I mean, there's a lot of people that, let's say they like to do these different puzzles, but they don't really use it in any other way. So then you probably need some other skill as well. You need some. You need these other intelligences as well to be able to actually use it for anything beneficial. And this is just an interesting thing. It's a side note, but I remember I think I was in my early 20s, and I've always felt pretty bad at math, like a lot of other people that are, in.
All of the people I helped get through high school.
Exactly.
Yeah. I did well at math and decided to pursue education and jobs in the social sciences. Go figure.
Yeah. So I was pretty bad at math. And the thing is that I always kind of thought that, I must have low IQ,
How depressing is that?
It's kind of depressing.
That follows people for the rest of their lives.
But it was kind of depressing. But I was just like, okay, I'm going to try to do this experiment. I was finding all the different Mensa homepages all around the world. And there's 156 something. It's a lot of them.
Yeah.
And
so you're not so bad at math. You can count.
Exactly. I can count 256 at least. But so I found all the homepages, and they have like a test that you can take. And it's not the official test that you take to be a part of Mensa, but it's kind of like meant to be, I don't know,
a primer.
Yeah, something like that. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna try a lot of these different tests, and I'm gonna see how I score. And I got a certain score, and I thought, okay, now I'm going to do, let's say, 2 or 3 tests a day for a month straight, and let's see what happens. So at the end of the month, I was pretty good. Like, I was Mensa level. And the thing is that I've
watching that IQ just skyrocket,
And I've learned the patterns. That's kind of what it is. So I took a month off, and then I did a couple of more tests. And I basically had the same level as when I went cold turkey on the IQ tests. So the thing is that I think some people they're pretty good at it, just that's the way they are. But it's something that you can learn. It's a language.
Yeah.
It's patterns that you learn to recognize, learn to see, and I'm still pretty good at like IQ tests.
This is a perfect segue to the second point that I had wanted to make that you had brought up a little bit earlier. How do you kind of teach these things, and what can we do in a classroom? And that is looking for these patterns.
Exactly.
Because there are patterns in writing as well. So much scientific writing, we can just say, follow the IMRAD, introduction, methods, results, and discussion, conclusion. Like, that is the most simple pattern of academic writing. But teaching people to be able to critically think, I believe that that's not just a matter of you being able to be critical of everything. Because there are definitely professors that I've met and people that I have met outside of university who they take that approach and they're just critical of everything, but it doesn't mean that they produce any good ideas or any useful ideas necessarily.
Pick things apart.
Yeah, they just kind of like to be critical. But being critical of what you read, not just the ideas that are presented, but sort of how you can deconstruct that writing, looking for the patterns. And this is maybe one of the big problems that so many young academics face, and I think it really deserves its own episode, but using jargon. I need to write this way in very long, prolific kind of sentences and paragraphs with big words and concepts and theories that I maybe don't completely understand.
Oh, yeah.
because we read a lot of stuff like that, and we're not spending the time thinking critically of the construction of those ideas. Why was it written this way? Do I like that approach? And by kind of realizing that there's a lot of good ideas presented in really bad writing can help you to kind of find the really good ideas presented in really good writing, the stuff that speaks to you, and deconstructing and figuring out the difference between those things and thinking critically of why does one speak to me a little bit more than this form of writing, even if it's on the same topic. Just a totally different author can be much clearer or much more engaging for you depending on how you like to learn and how you like to engage and critically read things and critically think about things.
Definitely. And I also think it's important that someone, if you're so lucky to have someone kind of tell you that, you know what, you're pretty good at this, that will give you a lot. I remember when I was a student, and it was like one of my quotation marks, favorite professors. He was a really interesting guy, and I remember it was like a term paper or something, and I remember he told me that I was pretty good at seeing connections between things. The thing is that I don't know if that was really the case. The point is that I kind of made that true. Okay, I'm good at this, and just having that kind of confidence, that made me pursue that even more. And I think it's the same thing with writing, or the IQ tests for that matter.
Positive reinforcement.
Positive reinforcement, and just understanding that things take time and it takes practice.
Yeah.
And then you're going to learn the formula, the pattern. You're going to get a higher IQ score. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're particularly intelligent, but you have learned the language. You learn how to master it. The sort of the template. And that's the same thing with academic writing. You talked about the IMRAD structure, or it could just be about all these different ways to organize your thoughts in the pre-writing process. You don't have to be particularly intelligent. It's just like systems that you can use, and that will make the final product will probably be a lot better.
And so that there as well, the feedback, the importance of getting good feedback, I think that comes down to, just generally, is there a culture at universities that really fosters improvement of communication, whether it be written communication or oral communication? That when we hear that from professors, students can't write. Well, okay, we got to ask the question, what are you doing to help them get better? And there are definitely some structural issues that I think are quite problematic, that feedback is sparse for many students.
Oh, yes.
So it's difficult to really understand what you did well, because it's very common you get the red pen marked up like, oh, this is misspelled, clarify this section, what does this mean?
Or just a grade.
Or just a grade. Yeah, nothing else that comes after to let you know, are you good at forming an argument? Are you good at seeing connections? Are you good at demonstrating evidence and justifying your position in a way that could be considered academic or scientific? And this, I think, is just something that is incredibly overlooked. And I understand that it can be tough. I always try to keep in mind that when you come to university, nobody really likes to say this, so I don't mind being the person who says it and get all the flack for it. Your professors are not trained as educators. They're trained as researchers. They're trained as scientists within their field. Now, they're very intelligent people, otherwise they wouldn't be here. But we have that sort of structural issue where the people who are responsible for providing an education, and especially when it comes to providing an education and a supportive culture around improving written communication, there's very little training that goes on there.
Oh, yeah, even for people that are, they're talking about pedagogics, they don't necessarily have the teacher training. I mean, so it's the way it is. But
I mean, so who are we except people who have taken teacher training and pedagogical education, and we practice it on we practice it on a daily basis. So we're not saying we're the best. I still have a lot to learn.
Definitely.
That's for sure. But I've definitely seen these shortcomings and tried to be better in my day to day with myself and my own writing, and also how I work with other people and how I communicate, how I provide my lectures and workshops. And we're seeing that shift. We've been at it. The Writing Center here has been going longer than I have been around, and so I've been here for, I think, about 6 years.
Yeah.
And we are starting to see that shift now. We've got some professors coming and working with us quite regularly, people who are looking more at their program planning. So the dent has been made. There's the chip in the armor now.
Yeah. And it's all about building momentum at this point. But I'm just kind of curious, how was this in Canada? Like, did you have some kind of formative evaluation or...
I can't speak for all of Canada because it's a very big place. And I went to a school that was kindergarten to the graduating grade of grade 12 in the province of Alberta.
Okay.
So the same school all my life.
Okay, so grade 12, how old are you at that point?
17, 18 years old.
So because the system is kind of different from Norway.
And so we did end up getting, formative education in writing, how to construct paragraphs and how to write essays. And, some people do well, some people do less well, but a lot of it was more under creative writing or what we called LA, language arts.
Okay.
And the people who did well at it kind of got a bit more support from the teacher. But again, this is incredibly small classes. I graduated with 16 or 17 people. So I can't tell you how it is at a much larger institution. But then when I went to go to university, there was a really big emphasis on writing because the program I was in education, and we do the major minor, just like in the United States. So I was majoring in political science I was majoring in education and minoring in political science and history. So all of those courses have a lot of writing involved. In the education side, you have to learn how to write an education plan. How do you write curriculum? So you learn these sort of the patterns of development in a way, how you develop teaching strategies, how you develop learning in people. So you need to really think about what are the connections. And then in history and political science, so much of what you're doing is just analyzing what you're reading, analyzing historical texts, analyzing what is being published in newspapers and magazines. So in a way, I don't remember having a writing course.
No.
But there was so much of this emphasis in deconstructing writing to figure out how it was built and what the intention behind it was. So all of this critical thought sort of stuff. So I think that's more of what stuck in my head. But I've definitely talked with other people from North America who have mandatory writing courses. I don't think I ever really received that, but I was writing probably 8 term papers each semester.
Okay, that many?
Yeah.
Wow. I think I had a mandatory writing course when I was a master's student. I can't remember because I wasn't too interested, to be honest. But it had a lot to do with the teacher. I think she was a postdoc or a PhD student. I'm not sure, but she was extremely unenthusiastic.
That always helps.
Yeah. And I remember she gave us this, like, we were supposed to write, we were supposed to critique, like, an exhibition and stuff like that. And the only thing that she said that I remember was, "Kill your darlings." And she said it so many times.
Metaphorically, right?
Yeah. Metaphorically, most definitely. I think. But she said it so many times that it was just, it kind of became a joke between us students. Mm-hmm. But it's, to connect it to something we talked about earlier, to the guitar riffs. Sometimes that is actually, everybody has experienced this super cool, or everybody that plays guitar have experienced this very cool riff that just doesn't work. And you put it in your kind of like the mind bank.
The riff bank.
The riff bank. But some of them never resurface.
That's true.
Yeah.
But it's all part of the process. If you hadn't have written that and struggled with it, you probably wouldn't have written something better.
Exactly. But it's the same thing with writing.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's, part of a paragraph or something that you really like. but it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
There's something about it.
The sacrifice for the greater good. And so I play in a band as well. I may as well just plug myself a little bit. But we're in that process of writing and recording. And the songs are mostly written. We've got 4 for a new EP. And for the first time, we're actually spending a lot of time critiquing our own songs.
Okay.
So the guitarist, does your part fit here? The vocals, are you fitting on time and locking in with the predominant groove in this section? Are we all playing too much of the same thing at this point? And can we spice this up? Where can we put a variation into the second or third chorus so it's not so repetitive and boring?
And kind of combine different melody lines.
Yeah. And by doing this and, taking the time to demo the stuff, which would be in writing, very early drafts, that we're not releasing this. It's not the final product by any stretch of the imagination. But we are really getting better, not just as musicians to be able to write better music, but we're getting better at communicating with each other, giving each other constructive feedback. And that was a problem we really struggled with it was just, don't do that. Okay, well, why? Why not?
Could you explain
and that's the scientist thought going on there. Why? Give me justification. Give me a reason. And that is something that, it comes down to the word that you used as well, too. Critique something. Be a critic of it. Find its weaknesses and point them out and justify why they are weaknesses. Not to be a jerk about it.
Of course. And
but
there's a big difference.
Yeah, but to strengthen it. And so all of this, the collaborative effort that goes into becoming a good musician or a good band is the same as what goes into being a good writer. But I do think we kind of take that for granted, that writing is a very personal thing and the feedback that you get should be sparse and it should be focused on small details. But then very often the feedback you get is, clarify this. Well, what the hell does that mean?
What does that mean? And the thing is that a band is usually guys or people that know each other. But let's say you're working on your thesis and you don't really know your supervisor that well. It's just like let's say it's your professor. The thing is that you could, and a lot of people, they let's say they turn in like an early draft or something, and then the feedback they get is, almost like to the point of spell checking.
Yeah.
Which is just a total waste of time.
Yeah.
And you could ask, does this make sense? Do I present the different ideas in a logical order? I mean, it should be possible to get feedback on stuff like that and then to get an explanation.
Mm-hmm. And developing that communication, whether you are working on a group report, a group essay. As I said earlier, you're currently co-authoring a paper for publication, or working with your supervisor, or just working with your professor. Being curious and asking them and giving them actually very specific comments on what you want them to look for if you're trying to make improvements. I've been trying this with my supervisors with some benefit to a couple of them and some of the others not so much. So a lot of this is like we've been talking about. It's more about developing good writing is about the collaboration and communication that you have that isn't necessarily writing.
Yeah.
That is reading, that is talking, that is probing and asking more critical questions. And when you get that feedback that is just spell checking, punctuation, grammar, and then, big X's through stuff or a question mark on the page, not being scared to go and talk to that person. What does this mean? It shouldn't be so cryptic, because if we want to get better, we need to actually be better at communicating our feedback as well.
It should be straightforward. Yeah. And I mean, in many cases, your supervisor doesn't necessarily know that much about whatever you're writing about.
Exactly. You're the expert on what you're writing about, especially at the PhD and postdoc levels.
Exactly. But it's the same thing with if you're writing your master's thesis. I mean, a lot of times one professor are supervising so many different students that are writing about different things. And it depends on the scientific discipline, but sometimes it's kind of like they don't really know anything about what you're writing about. They know some about maybe the underlying theories, but not really sometimes they might not understand the content because they're not too familiar with the topic. So, I mean...
And that's where you can rely on them for their degree of expertise. Maybe that is a person who is really, really good in the methodology. Even if you've used a different methodology than they're used to using, that you could rely on that person to improve that section of your paper.
Yes.
But the collaboration needs to go much further, because you should be thinking about your introduction and your conclusion, the most general, broadest parts of your paper. Maybe you should be talking more broadly to people outside of your discipline as well, your friends, your family, because that's how you really pull people in to your writing. Do your ideas even make sense? Are you leading people in a way that comes down to your hypothesis or your problem statement? Do you justify why you're doing that well enough? And can they give you feedback to say, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. That sounds really cool. And then realizing that there are services at most universities that we're very fortunate. We have a writing center with very well-trained staff. You can go and get more specific help on construction of the writing. But don't forget about the library either. You need help with the researching stage, with your discussion. Where can I find more information to support or explain what I found? Well, the library is a great place, and librarians are super knowledgeable, and they're used to answering these types of questions and giving you good answers. Yes. So realizing that writing isn't just this thing that you sit and do by yourself, but that you really are dependent as an author on so many different people at so many different stages of the writing process. And being open to that communication and that collaboration with others and making it a part of, I guess, your professional practice, even if you're just a bachelor or a master's student. What I like to tell students here in Norway is you're getting paid by the government to be here to study. You are a professional researcher the day you come in as a bachelor.
Because you don't have to pay for education.
Exactly. And that's such a wonderful thing. But that's not necessarily the mindset that people have when they come here. They don't see themselves as professionals. And most academics that I meet, most professional researchers that I meet, they're a researcher first and foremost. They don't see themselves as a professional writer, which is really what they are.
Oh, yeah, because that's how they communicate the information.
Yeah.
I don't know anybody who's tried this, but I just kind of sometimes, let's say you write a term paper, it could be your thesis, doesn't matter. And you're probably going to base it on a lot of stuff that's been done before, articles, publications. What you could do is that you could probably just send an email to the authors. Mm-hmm. Because they are not, I mean, when you read an article like that, you kind of think of them as...
you put them on a pedestal.
Exactly. Right? You put them on a pedestal. The thing is that they're completely normal people just like you. Yeah. And they're not academic superstars.
Well, that's assuming that I'm normal, of course.
Of course. But, I don't know. But the thing is that you put them on a pedestal, and that's kind of you could probably just send them an email, and they will be thrilled that someone asks them about their project. A lot of the people, they're not academic superstars. They're not like, I don't know, one of the really famous guys.
Yeah. And even those really famous people, the humble ones anyways, are still willing to answer an email a lot of the time. If they're not doing world book tours, they're probably someone who, they don't have their own booking agent, they don't have their own management. They'll respond themselves to a personal email.
And if they're alive, of course.
Yeah.
That's an important thing.
Exactly. How much of a priority is it for them? But it's always worth a shot. We're probably closing in on time at this point. Are there any final remarks or things that you kind of want to bring up about what we've been talking about?
We've been a little bit all over the place.
Yeah.
We've been primarily talking about kind of the pre-writing stage, but also that writing is something that you need to practice. And there's a lot of different systems that you can use to make it better. And I mean, it's like anything else. It's like working out. It's like training. You could find training plans. You could find, different things that will help your writing. One of them would be to go to the writing center.
Definitely. Shameless self-plug there. And that is just absolutely it. If I would end with anything, it's that writing is a skill. Whether it's creative writing, fiction writing, nonfiction writing, or scientific and academic writing. It's a skill that you get better at with time and with practice.
Oh, yeah.
But it's a skill that depends on so much more than your ability to put a pen to paper. It's your ability to think critically, to be able to problem solve, to see patterns, but also your ability to manage time, your ability to coordinate, your ability to collaborate and communicate with others in many regards that are typically not final writing. And I hope that with this podcast, we'll be able to help people move through the writing process and talk about other ways that you can really improve certain aspects of it. But I think that this is really important. Mm-hmm. Recognize that nobody is born perfect and nobody ever really becomes a perfect writer. We're always improving.
Oh, yeah.
And just if you're willing to do the work, you're willing to look at it that way, you will get better.
Most definitely.
So for all of those out there listening who might be stressed as a student or stressed as a researcher, we're just here to tell you, hey, it's going to be all right.
It's going to be all right.
Thank you very much for listening, everybody. I've been Clay from the NMBU Writing Center and Landscape and Society Department.
And I'm Niklas from the NMBU Writing Center. So hopefully talk to you next week or something.
We'll see you soon.
See you soon.